Hello, my name is Danny Trejo, and the following is a deathbed confession of John Leroy Kelly about the escape from Alcatraz Island in 1962.
The greatest mysteries of the 20th century include the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa, the JFK assassination, and the Alcatraz prison escape. In 1962, 3 inmates escaped from Alcatraz Island Federal Penitentiary. This was thought to be impossible. Their bodies were never found, and they were never captured. Until recently, there was a $1 million reward for information that led to the capture or discoveries of the bodies of Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin, who escaped on June 11, 1962. No one knows if they drowned in the chilly waters off Alcatraz that night, or truly made it off the rock. Recently, a new document was uncovered, a deathbed confession of a low-level criminal claiming involvement in the escape, which sent Art Roderick, the head of the US Marshals, and his partner Mike Earp, descendant of legendary lawman Wyatt Earp, cross-country with filmmaker Daniel Zarelli to investigate the oldest open case in US Marshals history.
I really don't know how to start this, except to just tell it. I guess you could say I'm a very famous person. It's just that no one knows who I am, or what I did. I, along with a man named Robert Michael Kyle, helped to pull off one of the most famous prison escapes in United States history. There was a lot of people involved in the escape from Alcatraz Prison. I know for a fact that high-ranking guards were paid for their part in the escape. I believe, from what the convicts told us, that the prison officials had to know or strongly suspect that guards at the prison took part in this escape. On Monday, June 11th, with Robert at the wheel, we picked up escaped inmates Frank Lee Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin. We took them north to Seattle on the boat. In the first 2 or 3 years after the prison escape, my Uncle Donald, the one that got me involved in the escape, said that the convicts' family members called him wanting to know what happened. I always told my Uncle Donald that me and Robert left the convicts in Canada and never saw them again. I don't think he really ever believed me. Please forgive me for what I did.
The spoon proves mightier than the bars at supposedly escape-proof Alcatraz Prison. 3 bank robbers serving long terms scratched their way through grills covering an air vent, climbed a drainage pipe, and disappeared from the forbidding rock in San Francisco Bay. It appears to be the first successful escape in the history of the maximum security prison, and the flight is attributed by Warden Olin Blackwell to the deteriorating condition of the prison, crumbling concrete and eroding metals, with $5 million needed for repairs. The men the walls couldn't hold are Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin. Authorities believe that Morris, who has a superior IQ, masterminded the escape. Ironically, the wanted posters offer only the nominal reward of $50 each for information leading to the arrest of the prisoners. They painstakingly fashioned dummies of plaster with hair of paintbrush bristles to stand in for them during cell check, while they covered an escape hole with a cardboard grill. All of this was within easy visual range of the guards in the gun galleries. They climbed drain pipes to the top of the cell block and then slid down vents to the ground. Again, all of this within sight of guards. The escape triggered the greatest manhunt in San Francisco's history, as agents of the FBI, Coast Guardsmen, Highway Patrol, sheriff's deputies, and local police joined in the search. Whatever their fate, the three convicts have apparently accomplished a feat that many have tried with no success.
For most, the name Alcatraz evokes images of iron bars, hard concrete, and brutal guards. A purgatory for anyone trapped inside. Although this is what Alcatraz became, it started as something very different. Isla de los Alcatrazes, or Pelican Island, was first surveyed in 1847. Devoid of any real natural resources and only one or two landable beaches, it seemed an unlikely asset to the newly acquired Republic of California. The U.S. Army, however, quickly saw the value of the barren rock. Sitting at the heart of the bay, the island was seen as an ideal location for artillery batteries that could protect the recently renamed hamlet of San Francisco. In 1853, construction began on Camp Alcatraz. Completed in 1859, the island became the first permanent harbor fortification on the United States West Coast. Declaration of civil war in 1861 left California fighting on the side of the northern states. 300 Union soldiers were stationed at Fort Alcatraz to fend off any possible Confederate assault on the San Francisco Bay. These soldiers waited for an attack that never came. Never once did the cannons of Alcatraz fire on an enemy. The camp did, however, find its use during the war. It began serving as a military prison for captured Confederate soldiers and sympathizers. It continued to operate as both fort and military prison for another 40 years. In 1900, it was decided that the fort would resign all defensive duties and would operate solely as an Army prison. Over the next 30 years, the inmates at Pacific Branch U.S. Military Prison Alcatraz transformed the Rock, as they called it, into the world's largest and most modern prison. Finally, in 1934, the War Department said goodbye to Alcatraz and handed the island over to the Department of Justice, where it remained until its closure in 1963. This is the era that the island prison is most famous for. The worst of all maximum security prisons, the most difficult time that any inmate could do. Alcatraz Island Federal Penitentiary. In its almost 30 years as an operational facility, Alcatraz was home to the nation's most dangerous and notorious criminals. Gangsters like Chicago crime boss Al Capone and Los Angeles-based mafioso Mickey Cohen both found themselves locked inside the walls of the Rock. Other most wanted criminals like Machine Gun Kelly and Doc Barker were also sent to Alcatraz. A veritable laundry list of the nation's most famous criminals declared residence on the Rock at one time or another. Given the miserable conditions at Alcatraz, combined with the nature of its inmates, it was inevitable that there would be escape attempts. However, In its 29 years of operation, Alcatraz claims that no prisoner ever successfully escaped.
This is the Alcatraz Prison escape statement, and I've faxed it to both the FBI and the US Marshals, and they've deemed it credible enough for follow-up. So 2 US Marshals and a tracker and myself are actively looking for the site that's mentioned in this statement.
I am typing this statement from my good friend and patient, John Leroy Kelly, who was born near Greenville, Mississippi, on or about September 3rd, 1944. He says that he does not have a birth certificate on file, and he never learned to write much more than his name, and states that he cannot read at all. John has asked me not to release this to anyone until he is dead. He is afraid of going to jail or prison for the part he played in the 1962 Alcatraz prison escape of Frank Morris, Clarence Anglin, and John Anglin.
When we get in these type leads, we look to say, we can't say, okay, this is it, it's a home run. Is this possible? And this one's possible. So that's why we're here.
We weren't involved, the Marshal Service as an agency wasn't involved with this case when it first happened.
For 18 years.
Right. We didn't get it until 1979.
80, I think.
1980.
81, yes.
When the Attorney General made the Marshal Service responsible for what they call the escape and rescue statutes, which are the federal statutes that an individual is charged with for escape or aiding and abetting an escape and all that. So that case came over to us when the Attorney General gave us that authority, more or less moved it from the FBI to us. So we didn't go back and try and recreate the investigation, because let me tell you, the Bureau
1,700 pages.
They did a lot of stuff. I mean, surveillances, interviewed family members, year after year they went back, and I mean, they did a real good investigation. So we weren't going to go back and recreate that. Basically, what we've done up to this point is if something comes up, we'll follow the lead out till the end.
Thousands of people visit Alcatraz Island every year to see Al Capone's cell and hear about the Birdman of Alcatraz. They come to see how Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers escaped. What they hear are the tour-guided facts, a rehearsed and recited account based on speculation as to how the escape actually happened. Never before has Alcatraz revealed everything that it knows and doesn't know about what happened that fateful night.
So I just got off the phone with Art. Apparently Craig at the Ranger's office at Alcatraz called to verify if Art was working with us on the Alcatraz statement. And Art told the guy to give them, Daniel and Neil, all access to everything they have on Alcatraz.
When I talked to the US Marshal Service this morning, they indicated that this was the first time that Art's been on the case in 12 years, I believe he said, that they had anything really worth pursuing. They felt that it was had enough possibilities to dedicate some time to it.
Alcatraz was designed and run as a maximum security, minimum privilege penitentiary. That meant our inmates received no tailor-made cigarettes, candy bars, chewing gum, soft drinks, radio, television, newspapers, paroles, or rehabilitation programs. They had none of that by being sent here. In fact, none of our inmates were sent from a court. They're all sent from another prison having a problem. And some told me from the prison they came from, the warden of an institution would have a picture of Alcatraz behind his desk, and he'd point to a picture and say, if I see you one more time, that's where you're going. You are going to Alcatraz. And you knew you were going to do some tough times. Now, you come and visit the island, and you look out, and you see all these beautiful views. You see San Francisco, the East Bay, Marin County. You say, gee, that's not so bad. But how'd you like to have water held out to you and you can't drink it? You know, it's a city so close, and yet so far.
Is there any way you think they made it?
At first, I would have said yes, but since they haven't showed up in all these years, I doubt it now.
given the bay and the tide conditions that night and what physical evidence was discovered over the next couple days by the FBI, most of the staff on the island have been of the opinion that they probably didn't survive the swim.
I don't think there's been any trace of them found, which in a way is kind of unusual because bodies do turn up in the bay here mostly. When somebody drowns, they'll find pieces of them, they'll find parts of their clothes.
50 degrees out there, or about 10 to 12 Celsius. It's very cold. Although 400 people a year swim from Alcatraz to San Francisco, we have at least 2, maybe 3 swims a year. Most people can't handle it. If you can't do it in 35 or 40 minutes, you know, you're going to be in trouble. So it can be done. It's a myth that it can't be done. It's done all the time.
One of the stories that's most often been told was that they planned to steal a boat at Angel Island, and given that that didn't happen, that sort of led to a general belief that the chances are that they didn't make it. However, we know of many swims, organized swims, that do that bay every year. So we always sort of leave the story with an open end that, well, one never knows. After all, they were pretty highly motivated. You know, at the point that they left their cells that night, at that point, they're escaped convicts. They had nothing left to lose. Once a federal inmate escapes from prison, that becomes an FBI case, apparently. It comes under their jurisdiction. However, as a fugitive from justice, the US Marshals Service has jurisdiction too. The Bureau of Prisons would still, of course, potentially be involved in this, since they are fugitives from the Bureau of Prisons. They would still have time on their original sentences. There's no statute of limitations. So there's various law enforcement agencies, should evidence pan out and there be more to the story than we now know, there would be several federal agencies ultimately that would probably be interested in it.
If you talk to any of the former prisoners, they'll, of course, all of them say they got away. And if you talk to the former guards, they'll all of them say they're dead, they drowned at sea. But they're still on the wanted list of the FBI, and so they're not going to give up until there's some proof that they actually died.
Is there any way you think they made it?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah, I helped them with some tools do that, and I know John and Clarence swam before they could walk. They were born and raised in the Everglades, so personally, I believe they made it.
John has told me that he and a friend helped the 3 convicts to escape from Alcatraz Federal Prison in San Francisco.
At 11:15 p.m. on Monday, June 11th, Robert and I were in a boat off Alcatraz Island Prison. At approximately 10 minutes to midnight, we moved to the area just outside the city marina. At about midnight, I heard splashes in the water. They were lying across a homemade life raft. We picked up escaped inmates Frank Lee Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin. I remember one of the men, Frank Morris, laughed and asked if we were their ride. Robert asked where was the other 2. Frank Morris said they were it. We took them north to Seattle on the boat. When we got back to Bellingham, we had the 3 convicts get into the back of the truck that we used for painting and had them lie down in the back.
Alcatraz had a reputation, I think it was to a large degree deserved, of being run more by the book than any other facility. It was part of the reason they created Alcatraz in 1934, because of problems that did exist in other federal prisons. But there's certainly stories of payoff. I mean, at a low level, there were guards that broke some of the rules, inconsequential rules, like you weren't allowed to have candy. There was no commissary to buy candy there. Yet there was a correctional officer who worked in the shop that would sometimes slip in and make a piece of candy if they'd done a particularly good job on the line. One day, one of those inmates got caught with that candy, and rather than turn the guard in, he did 19 days in solitary, I guess. It may have been more. punishment for refusing to inform, because they knew this had to come from correctional staff. We know of, again, religious staff on the island that came out here, in at least one case, smuggling letters off the island because they felt the inmates had more of a right to private correspondence with their lawyers than what the law allowed at that time.
Craig, one of the rangers here, said that the religious staff sometimes thought that conditions were a little tough and that sometimes priests or the religious staff would help give information in letters, bring letters to the families and such. Do you know anything about that? No.
No, I would say that the religious staff, as I understood it, certainly myself as a part of the religious staff and the priest that I worked with coming out here, were scrupulous about that. We were instructed in a number of ways that we were never to take any contraband in or out. Okay. And also, there was a no hostage policy. So when we went down into the yard to walk around and talk with them down there, we knew that if they ever grabbed us and captured us in any way at all, the guards on the towers would start shooting. And so you kind of took your life in your hands if you ever did go down in there. But I never ever felt insecure around the prisoners. They were always extremely kind to me and also very respectful of me. And I think part of it had to do with the fact that we were able to get in here from the outside. Very, very few people, including their wives and children, couldn't get into this prison. They talked to them through those walls, you know, with those 2-inch thick glass windows and through telephones. And we would actually walk in here and we could touch them, they could touch us, and they could ask us questions. We could tell them about the outside world. And so we were kind of a breath, I was, and the chaplain service people were a kind of a breath of fresh air for them, and a kind of a bright spot in their life. And they were not about to hurt us or take us hostage. I never had any ever experience like that. And I also never heard of any chaplain ever taking contraband in or out. Right. Now sometimes we took messages in the sense that you'd say, well, say hello to my wife or somebody if you knew the person, but and you just say hello, that was all.
Apparently there was a woman on the outside that was helping make arrangements for their escape.
Well, that's what they said.
My uncle, Donald Leroy Robertson, is the one that got me involved in the Alcatraz prison escape. He had been a driver for several big-time bank robbers at one time or another in the 1930s and 1940s. And he knew Frank Lee Morris. In October of 1961, my Uncle Donald had me go to San Francisco to meet a woman named Eugenia McGowan in St. Anthony's Catholic Church in the San Francisco Tenderloin District. That day changed my life forever. Many times over the years, I have wished that I had not went to that meeting. She told me that day that 5 convicts were going to escape from Alcatraz and that she needed me to provide a boat to pick them up and take them to safety. She told me that the convicts' families had come up with over $60,000 to help them escape, and that 6 guards at Alcatraz Prison were receiving payoffs to look the other way or to help the convicts. She said that she was telling me all this so I and my partner Robert would know that the escape would be able to happen without any problems. She gave me $5,000 cash in 20s in an envelope that day, and she was to give me another $5,000 when she found out the exact night the convicts would be able to get out. Eugenia never knew it, but she had sealed the convicts' fate when she told me that the convicts would be picking up $50,000. Robert was obsessed with trying to figure out some way to separate the convicts from the $50,000 when we got them back to Seattle. I can't believe now that I went along with Robert's wild scheme.
According to all the evidence available, most importantly the FBI's investigation, the point at which the Anglin brothers and Frank Morris went into the bay was just around the corner from the point you see from here. But their choice of location to go into the water, it would have been very important to take into account this tower being here. Other towers were by and large at the back end and other side of the island. There used to be a tower on the roof of the cell house from which they made their escape from the building. That had been closed down due to budget cuts and staff shortages years earlier. Okay, here we have the cell house at the top of the island, originally constructed by the Army when this was a military prison. The Anglins made their escape from an air vent approximately in this area. By all accounts, made their way down here where they were able to slide down an exhaust vent from one of the kitchen stoves down below. This was the mess hall and food preparation area and the hospital.
Remember, as you look at the island, the plush vegetation all over the island today didn't exist back then. You didn't want a shrubbery this tall in the days that this was a prison. Everything was very low and trim. There were gardens, there were flowers, there were trees, but everything was trimmed in a way to prevent there from being places to hide. But certainly by this time, staffing shortages and budget cuts had an effect on the security. The roof tower had been shut down completely. There hadn't been a tower on the roof. Had that still been there, this escape never could have happened.
The road tower would have been the tower
over on this side of the island, which according to all the physical evidence is the side of the island that the three left from that night. From the road tower, the view of the point they went into the water would have been right around the corner.
On May 11th, I met Eugenia in front of St. Anthony's Catholic Church. We walked to the waterfront, and we met a man in the shadows there. He showed me where the water was likely to carry the convicts on a raft to, and he told me to expect them just after midnight on June 11th. He told me that the convicts would run into no trouble because he was going to make sure that there was no guard in the road tower that night. He said that we should have till 8 a.m. at the earliest to get away before the alarm was sounded. Later on, I discovered that the man we met that night was Alcatraz prison guard, Captain Bradley. I've always wondered how no one ever found out that something wasn't right at Alcatraz prison that night. One thing that Morris figured was sure to get the guards caught was all the things that were hid on top of the cell house. He said that at least 50 to 60 raincoats were used to make the rafts. When two of the convicts didn't take part in the escape, one of the rafts was left on top of the cell house. Morris said that several guards, not just one or two, turned their heads or just didn't say anything about the things they had seen in the weeks leading up to the escape. Frank Morris told us that Captain Bradley had gone as far as to order blankets to be hung up over the top of the cell house to keep paint from falling into the cells and the floor below. But the real reason the blankets were put up there was to give the convicts unrestricted access to the rooftop of the cell house and to allow the convicts to escape.
I mean, ironically, even though everyone knew those blankets were there, it's not in the official Bureau of Prisons report. The fact that those blankets that were up there blocking the guards' view of that area on the roof of the cell block, allowing them to make their escape that night, the fact that those sat there for months, arguments amongst the guards, who has authority to okay those blankets being there or not. But what it was is some of the guys planning the escape worked in the cell house, and they pointed out how badly that area where there's some utility pipes between the top of the cell block and the actual roof of the building. There was a gap there by design. So each cell block is a building within the cell house, but no part of the cell block touches an exterior surface of the building. Well, they needed some way to work up there to get through the air vents, and so they said, well, we need to paint this area. But look at all the dust and debris and paint chips that are going to be flying around. Gee, can we get some blankets from the Army supply that we wash out here and hang them up to contain all the dirt and debris? One correctional officer said, no way. The other one pulled rank and said, no, go ahead. We don't want all that stuff floating around the cell house and people getting eye irritations from this and stuff, so go ahead and do this.
How many people do you think knew about the planning of the escape?
Everybody. Everybody but the guards.
One of the inmates that was in the cell house at the time that was marginally involved in the plan, the night of the escape, and this is fairly well documented, some tools or other implements were dropped down through the utility cord or bounced off some of the water or sewage pipes that are back in that area. What surprised him was the lack of a response.
I mean, these guys were climbing up and down the pipes every night in the backs of other guys' cells. And so they had to make all kinds of arrangements with these people because there was a group of black prisoners that were in here. These were all white guys. And they had to climb, and they were white Southern prisoners too, and they were climbing up the backs of these black guys' cells to get up on the roof. Well, it didn't take them very long to figure out what was going on, and so they had to make some compromises and deals with the other prisoners around here, and so word kind of got around and got around and got around. I must say, I was surprised, believe it or not, I was surprised that I didn't know anything.
The real surprise of the trip came when we got back to my Uncle Donald's house. He was the one holding the hidden 50,000. We received our 10,000 more, with my Uncle Donald getting 4,000 of the 40. We stayed at Uncle Donald's for over a week. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers were sure the guards would be arrested and kept listening to the radio and watched the newspapers to see the story about the arrest of the guards. But it never happened. When they read the story in the newspapers that spoons had been used to dig out of the cells, they broke down laughing. They said that shortly before the escape, jackhammers were used to replace the toilets in the cells. The jackhammer was operated by Alan West, who they said had been assigned to prison maintenance since May of 1961. He was allowed to work in the space behind the cells alone because the guards didn't want to get dirty. While he was back there, he used the jackhammer to cut the air vent open. The 3 convicts said they would have never been able to get out if it hadn't been for Alan West with the jackhammer.
Alan West is generally credited with being very involved in the plan and with the escape attempt. His statement to the FBI was the night of the escape, he had trouble opening up the fake air vent that they put over his cell and then trouble getting out. That's why he didn't escape that night. By the time he got out and up to the roof, the other 3 were long gone.
If you've ever been up there, it's interesting to get on top of the cell block and take a look at what they actually did up there, which is phenomenal when you see what they had to do under the scrutiny of the guards.
We know other inmates that were here that aided and abetted in other ways escape plan. It was real obvious talking to inmates that were on the island at the time that there was a lot of people that were aware of what was going on and in various ways supporting them.
June 11th, June 12th, 1962, the escape had occurred the night before, but none of us knew it, and because the masks worked, the dummies worked.
You know, we know people that helped them with getting the flesh tones right, add a little rouge to make the cheeks look more realistic, hair from the barbershop, tools and implements from around, the material. I mean, it had to be a significant amount of fabric, raincoat material for the vests and their pontoons that they were using to build some sort of a raft.
Alan West, of those 4 men, Alan West was the most dangerous. He got the men up there. If it wasn't for him, they'd have never gotten to the roof.
Alan West is generally credited for being, if you will, one of the main brains behind the escape. Now, others say other things too, but he certainly was involved. Certainly had an opportunity that night to be the 4th man.
But he didn't go in the end, and people always wonder why. He either couldn't get out of his cell like he claimed, or he chickened out, take your pick.
I kind of thought about the idea that maybe he had decided this was a suicide attempt rather than an escape attempt. Didn't want to say to the other guys now very involved in this, hey, I don't think it's going to work after all. and maybe just backed out and didn't try to get out that night, knowing that they wouldn't wait for him. Whether or not that's true, I have no reason to know one way or the other, but that seemed like another possible scenario to why he was still in his cell that morning when the other three were long gone.
What more could they get? Just more time if they were caught trying to escape?
What they would have had was probably some time in isolation, in D block at that time. And then certainly time could be added to their sentence for the escape attempt.
What is, can you describe what D block was like if you were put in?
Ironically, it had the best views in the cell house and the largest cells because it was the most recently renovated area. What made D block tough was that good view, because that was a view of freedom you didn't have. And the fact that you were locked in there 24 hours a day. It was a larger cell than the regular inmate cells because they were newly renovated in the 1940s. But you were on lockdown 24 hours a day. You didn't have any of the privileges to have a job, you mess hall, any of the other privileges that the other inmates got here, which were a lot less than other prisons. D block was, mentally it was a tough time to spend 24 hours a day looking at the same three walls and set bars.
While we were at my Uncle Donald's, the three convicts told us that Clarence Carnes had not been able to get out of his cell, and that Alan West had just flat chickened out. He told them he was going all along. Then at the last minute, he told them that he was afraid of the water. He was also concerned that they would get in the water and there wouldn't be any boat out there. They didn't know it, but that made things a lot easier for us. The fact that there was 3 convicts, not 5.
This week, I arranged for a local priest to start counseling John and hear his confession. It seems to have improved his spirits greatly. I cannot sign the statement or give my name because I have broken patient confidentiality by giving some of the information I have in this account. I could be fired from my job or lose my nurse's license, so for that reason, I must remain anonymous. But I will do my best after John's death to ensure that this statement and John's statement get into the right hands.
Do you know if the nurse that took the statement from John Kelly, if she took, there's something in there that says that put it in a safety deposit?
I've got the original document.
Is it handwritten or is it typed?
It's typed.
I know she says I typed, but I didn't know if originally she took, because she was trying to turn it over to John's sister, but she didn't want it.
So she gave the whole thing up.
Yeah, and I mean, it's weird for somebody to send me like an original typed or printed. I mean, it was the 80s, so there were computers. I mean, this is it. I mean, it feels like, you know,
which
is
is
not
a
a Xerox. That's just a copy. Okay, it's that copy. I mean,
this looks like a term paper.
Yeah, right. So I mean, it, you know, that's supposedly the original. So, I mean, I would like to keep that if possible because I am a collector of documents, but that's the supposed original that was overnighted to me with some other material.
Well, if you hold on to it for now, let's see where the other end plays out.
Cool.
We'll maybe asking you for the original.
Now, in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a couple of shows that came out. Unsolved Mysteries. Right. I know the History Channel's done some stuff, the Discovery Channel.
Right.
And those tended to generate more leads. And we would always end up following up on those leads.
We would run their fingerprints every year, nationwide. Right. So if they run an alias, we could find out if they committed any crimes and have been printed by some police department. Same thing with Canada, who has a mutual relationship with the U.S. So, you know, none of that turned out.
We just did a lead a year and a half ago in Texas, right? With the guy that looked like him, we got something.
Oh, really?
The lead got sent to us. We got a hold of his driver's license. It was after there was a History Channel show on where we aged enhanced.
Right. Did you guys do that?
Yeah,
I noticed
we did that
on the internet.
Yeah. And we went and sent those out to everybody. And somebody came back and said, geez, it looks just like this old guy that was. So, you know, we went and followed the lead up. In Texas, I guess you have to have your fingerprints or a thumbprint on the driver's license, and we actually were able to verify that it wasn't him, based on fingerprints.
Today is March 17th. John Leroy Kelly died at 3 a.m. this date of AIDS-related pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. He died quietly in his sleep. John received the last rites of the Roman Catholic Church just after 11 p.m.
So I got some information that we can go check out a death certificate down the street on John Leroy Kelly. If he died in this area, apparently it will be on record, and that's where we're going next.
John was a no-code patient, so he did not attempt to resuscitate. I'm truly glad for John that his long struggle is over. May he rest in peace.
I basically narrowed it down to about 5 hospices in the area. From that, we're going to go back to the Hall of Records and find out if there's a death certificate. But even without a death certificate, we can get a lot of great information now.
Sarah Lang of Vancouver, British Columbia called me on the phone and asked if she could come down and talk to me about her brother. I said yes, if she could agree to complete confidentiality concerning my identity. She agreed, and I met her at the downtown public library. During our meeting, she brought up the Alcatraz Prison escape and asked me what her brother John had told me about the Alcatraz incident. I gave her a copy of everything, and she stated that it was the same story that John had told her for years before. She stated that she had heard the same story over and over many times from John and felt she almost knew it by heart. That he and a friend helped the 3 convicts to escape from Alcatraz Federal Prison in San Francisco. And they then killed the 3 escaped convicts to keep all of a large sum of money.
While we were at my Uncle Donald's, we finally decided that we would get the convicts into the back of Robert's pickup truck, drive them into the woods, and shoot them real quick and bury them. Robert picked a good spot along the highway, and we even dug a big hole before we picked them up. Robert went somewhere and got 2 .38 caliber pistols, which he hid in the toolbox under the driver's seat of the truck.
I told her about John making his confession to the Catholic priest, and that I felt it had helped John's peace of mind tremendously. And I told her that I believed John had died in peace. I had offered her these papers, including John's statement, but she said she did not want to get involved. She told me that it was true about their Uncle Donald being a driver for big-time bank robbers. She said that back when he was doing this, that it worked out very well. She said that there was a family rumor that Uncle Donald had at one time been sentenced to a lot of time in Angola State Prison in Louisiana, but that he escaped after a very short time and fled to the Pacific Northwest. According to her, no one ever found Uncle Donald, and he died of an old age in Seattle. One interesting thing she said was that John had trouble getting rid of some of the money they took off the convicts because it was so old. She said that some of the bills were very large, but were still legal tender and could be spent. When she got up to leave, I again tried to give John's papers, but she refused and left. I don't really know who to give John's statements to. I have thought about mailing it to a news agency or the FBI, but I'm not really sure what to do with it. Like John, I feel the time had come for the truth about the Alcatraz prison escape to come out. I miss John at times. He probably was right about being famous if everyone knew the truth about what he did.
A request for a death certificate for John Leroy Kelly. I'm obviously very curious if there's a death certificate on file, because this is another piece of the puzzle that I'm trying to put together.
Typically, in escape, a couple things happen. For example, in the case of Henry Young, who they made a movie real loosely based on him a few years ago, when he escaped from Walla Walla State Prison, the first thing he did was go home. One thing that has led circumstantially to our belief that they probably didn't make it, based on what we knew so far, was the fact that there were no crimes later on that were attributed to them. There was no, although family members have talked to us and claimed there were things going on, they're not going to want to spill the beans, as it were, on that. The typical escape would leave a trail. And it's not to say that there aren't exceptions, but to go home, to rob another bank, to commit another crime, to do something to leave a fingerprint somewhere is not at all uncommon. And it's been lacking that over the years, since it's been so many years and nothing credible so far had shown up. That added to the likelihood that our opinion, or my opinion I should say, that they didn't survive the bay, it just added to that. The fact that these guys never surfaced again, the fact that they never were connected to any crimes again. Not to say that, well, people say, well, if they were smart, they wouldn't do those things. Well, if they were smart, they probably wouldn't have been doing what they were doing to begin with, is the other way to look at that.
Because we always stuck to the theory that if they had escaped and got away, they would be committing crimes. Right. So they would eventually get caught. The only thing they knew to do was bank robbers, or career criminals. So we knew that if they did get away, they weren't in the U.S. Right. And they probably weren't in Canada, because Canada has the same type of law enforcement program that we do, and they eventually would have got caught doing something over there. So that's why we really looked at anything internationally, and we weren't really concerned with the historical. We've had cases like this before where somebody's actually gone back, dug the bodies up, and then spread the bones someplace. All we end up with was fragments of bones in there. They're never going to get up all the bones. There's going to be, if there were bodies buried in there and somebody came back to get the bodies up, there's going to be something left in there.
Gotcha.
Okay? It's impossible to get everything once you put something in the ground like that.
What would be the method of forensically finding out? Is there dental records, or is there DNA of any kind? Or
we'll have to make that determination, and whichever state or local authority we will be dealing with that.
We do have records.
Yeah, I've got records of them.
Dental records?
And medical and dental records from the Bureau of Prisons, so we can use that, but we'll make determination.
Of course, I know we're ahead of ourselves.
This is fluid. We're going to have to play a lot of this by ear as we go.
So we just met with Mike Earp and Art Roderick, the US Marshals. We're caravanning right now to meet with a local guy who knows the area. We're leaving Seattle. It's about an hour outside of Seattle. According to the statement, It's going to be about 1.5 miles. On the left-hand side, there used to be a dirt road. Apparently in 1962, that dirt road was not blocked by a guardrail, but now we're going to have to walk over the guardrail. From that point, we go down the dirt road, and apparently there is going to be some big rocks that we're going to look for, and some trees. On the rocks, as of 1993, there was paint to mark the rocks, and then at one point in the 80s, John, the guy who gave the statement, actually nailed horseshoes into trees around the area and apparently buried a box of horseshoes right over the bodies where they were buried. So underneath the horseshoes, if we find them, there may be the bodies of the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, and Frank Morris. So the initial thing we're looking for is the landmarks. So wish us luck.
Over the last weekend, me and my son took John up to the spot where he says the 3 convicts are buried. There was still some splotches of yellow paint on the big rocks, just like John told me there would be. We took 4 gallons of red deck paint with us, and my son made a big circle and an X over where John says he and his friend Robert buried the 3 convicts in 1962.
His name's Al Davis. He's an old timer. He's lived in this area for his whole life. He's at least 70 or 80 years old. Really funny, nice guy. He said though, if you go back even 10 years, 10, 20 years, everything's changed about this location. He said even for myself, he goes, that could describe 4 or 5 roads that aren't even there in existence anymore. So it's going to be really hard for you to find what you're looking for. He said that we're like 5 miles off base. He said most likely that we should go back up and turn to the right, sort of where that area that near the lake where we went. And there's actually another right turn that kind of just, I let him read the one paragraph about the directions. He said, you have better luck in that area. But, you know, he just said there's just 4 or 5 places in this area that have changed, and it's just going to be hard to find based on those semi-vague. It sounds like vague directions to him because there's too many options.
You can no longer turn off the highway at that location. There's now a guardrail, and you have to park on the roadside and walk from there. We were able to find 2 of the horseshoes nailed to the trees.
Okay, so we have good news and bad news. The good news is we met with a tracker who knows exactly the area and exactly the turnoff where he thinks, you know, the statement is pointing to. The bad news is that he said it's a big area, it's going to be hard to find, and that it might be snowing, so there might be snow on the ground. So anyways, we'll see.
This would be the 30-foot.
Yeah.
This is the closest. Yes.
Pull the truck up in here.
Stand up there.
We'll stand on the roof and look at this mark on the tree here. Pull yours. Let me. You can't fly? Oh, okay. looks like yellow paint.
And does this look like red deck paint?
Sure does.
Holy shit! And does that look like it could be a knot where maybe a horseshoe was up there? Let's say 30 feet off the road. I mean, that's totally unnatural, is it not? I mean, it could be analyzed, of course, but I think it's worth bringing a metal detector in this area. Look at that.
Well, here's the rest of it. Here's where it came off right here.
I mean, that many rounds. You know, they blasted them. They blasted them.
On June 21st, we started driving towards Canada in the truck with the convicts. At a few minutes past 5 p.m., Robert hit me on the leg, which was a signal we had arranged. He told them we were stopping to pee. He had made a point over the last few days of complaining about his weak kidneys. Less than 30 feet away, the big hole we had dug waited. And 2 shovels. I heard him get into the toolbox under the driver's seat for the pistols. And he handed me one of the pistols down by his side. We walked to the back of the truck. Robert opened the truck's tailgate. Frank Morris must have seen the pistol in Robert's hand because I heard Morris say, "You sons of bitches," but in almost the same instant, we were both shooting into the back of the truck. I've never been able to forget the way they jumped around and the sound the bullets made when they hit their bodies. It was the worst thing that I did in my life. Robert reloaded his pistol, and I pulled the convicts out by their feet. John Anglin was the last one I pulled out, and he was alive and talking. Even though he had been hit several times and had to be hurting very badly, he begged not to die. But Robert shot him 3 or 4 more times. We dumped them into the big hole we had dug. One at a time, we threw our pistols into the hole along with the bloody canvas they had been lying on in the back of the truck. We covered them up and spread a bag of grass seed all over the dug-up ground.
Do it this close? Of course, this is more secluded than down there with the houses.
Yeah, and then in the 60s, there's probably not as much traffic.
Did they put all the horseshoes on one tree?
No, there are four before in a circle, sort of a circle, and then when they came back in the 90s, there were only two left. We're looking up at a tree, and if you look closely, it looks like potentially where a horseshoe could have been at one point. Either the tree could have grown around it, or the tree could have pushed it out of its bark. Would it maybe grow around the tree or push it out?
Yeah, if you go around. This is a spot here we're going to have to...
Yeah. They buried a box of horseshoes. He came back in the 80s. Buried a box of horseshoes so that he could find the spot again. Okay. This is one potential site that's about 30 feet off the road, off the 90. There's a guardrail over there. There's also evidence that could be a horseshoe up on a tree, about 14 feet high. We'll see. It's not far. I think it's got potential like crazy. Those paint chips and that little place that could have been a horseshoe at one time. I don't know. So we're calling it a day. It's getting dark. We found one spot that had a lot of potential with a couple markings and a horseshoe-shaped indentation in a tree. So we're gonna come back tomorrow at the spot, see what else we can find out. Yesterday, we were a little discouraged when we went to the location because the rocks weren't quite as big as we expected. And there were a few things about the statement that, that Mike Earp had pointed out that troubled him in some manner. I mean, most of the things about the statement turned out to look like they're totally correct and accurate. But some of the questions he posed, I gave it a little thought over the last 12 hours, and this is my idea of the answers, maybe. One of the things that he said was that it was very unlikely that they would trust somebody with $40,000 or $50,000, this person, Uncle Donald, because in the 60s, that was a ton of money. Now, I thought about that, and number one, Frank Morris, he was friends with this Uncle Donald, and Uncle Donald was 78 years old at the time. So I just don't see that some 78-year-old guy would necessarily run off with the money from a friend of his at that age. The other part about it's being a large amount of money, you know, for sort of like two-bit thieves to put together. When you think about it, there were supposed to be 5 people, 5 convicts escaping at Alcatraz. So 5 people, let's say $40,000 or $50,000, their family, some of the money that they got in bank robberies.
That's only about $10,000 a piece, approximately $10,000, $12,000. So to start a new life in Canada, which was obviously the idea according to this statement, $10,000, $12,000 a piece, split by 5 men, seems like a reasonable amount of money to put together, especially if you've got a loved one in jail. Back to the location. So we went to the location yesterday, and so, you know, in our mind's eye, we sort of maybe thought these rocks were going to be bigger. We did find some really interesting evidence. We found a really cool-looking horseshoe-shaped indentation in a tree. We also found some paint scraps in yellow and red, which is, again, we didn't find exactly paint on the rocks. But we found some evidence that, you know, is circumstantial and enough to follow up on. So today we're going to go back, and I'm not sure what else. We'll ask the US Marshals what else they're going to do, but we've identified a really highly potential site.
Okay, we're back at this spot, and I just found a few interesting things. Okay, originally they said that he nailed 4 horseshoes into a tree. Just bear with me. Look at that nail. 1. See the nail? Come over here. 2. Second nail. Follow me. 3. So we were looking for horseshoes. Now, you know, when she came back, apparently there were only 2 left, but now there are no horseshoes. But look, there are 1, 2, 3 over there, and 4 nails. And this is the area that I said looks like somebody maybe came back at some point. Just point the camera right down there. I'm not saying this is where the hole was dug, but maybe this is where he came back and dug this little ground up to bury the horseshoes. It's not like, this area looks to me a little unnatural to the rest. It looks like something was dug out and it's all uneven here. This feels like, if anywhere could be the spot, you know, this has got a lot of potential. There are 4 nails in somewhat of a circle in this spot, and it's exactly what we're looking for. Now come over here and look at these rocks. Yellow and red paint. I'm hoping that we'll come back and survey this whole area, because this ground, this area, and those markings look good to me.
Go ahead.
You know George Clooney's gonna play in the movie version, right?
Doing well. Pretty good. Some research on it now to find out what the deal is. You know, we'll have to get the GPS coordinates to that particular location. We'll probably do that today. But I know the name of the individual you got this statement from. If we could just do a we can run a background on him right now. We can call our headquarters, find out if he's connected to what his mother's name is, where she's from, and where he's been.
Right.
He's got to be something. I mean, he's got to be.
Yeah, he's real paranoid about his identity.
Right. You know, we're at that point. I mean, we don't even know if she's alive.
Right.
And if you're telling me this guy sounds like he's in his 50s, and this is his mother, and she's got to be at least in her 70s or 80s.
Right.
You know?
Right, I got you.
So.
Okay.
And we're going to
But
have.
they gave the statements. Let's be honest about it.
Yeah.
They are the ones providing statements in reference to this guy confessing to homicides and whatnot. Yeah, those law enforcement officials that could be investigating that, yeah, their name's going to have to be known. They're going to be questioned. They're going to be interviewed. They're going to be possibly compelled to testify.
I mean, there is a
for the
possibility.
accuracy of these statements.
Right.
There's no doubt. I don't want to mislead you on that. That is.
I mean, as far as we're concerned, the public's not going to get any information.
No, we're not going to release anything.
I mean, we don't.
But the law enforcement, yeah.
Right.
It's my.
Who was this man, John Leroy Kelly? A phantom? A charlatan? A phony? Or was he telling the truth? Did he and his partner take part in one of the most well-planned and coordinated escapes in history? An escape that could only have been successful with help from inside and outside the walls of the rock. What is irrefutable is that the three men made it out of their cells and into the water that night. It is only speculated that they drowned at sea. Was the culmination of their complex plan merely to swim across the bay, risking hypothermia and drowning, only to come ashore in bustling downtown San Francisco? Or did they have something more sophisticated in mind? For now, their fate still remains a mystery. Or does it?